The howl cut through the silence of the night like a blade. I froze mid-step, my breath catching in my throat as the sound echoed across the moonlit forest. It wasn't a normal wolf's howl, too deep, too human. The hairs on the back of my neck stood upright as the echo faded into the darkness between the ancient pines. I shouldn't have come here, not alone, not at night. My name is Theodore Mills, though none of that matters now. What matters is that I'm trapped in these woods with something hunting me, something that shouldn't exist. The beam of my flashlight trembled across the forest floor as another howl, closer this time, shattered the night. My heart hammered against my ribs as I broke into a run, the fallen pine needles crunching beneath my boots. The rational part of my brain screamed that wolves don't attack humans, that Maine hadn't had wild wolves for nearly a century. But what I'd glimpsed between the trees moments ago wasn't entirely wolf, nor was it entirely human. The old logging road I'd been following had disappeared sometime in the last half hour. I was disoriented, having ventured far deeper into the North Woods than I'd planned. What had started as a simple overnight camping trip to clear my head after the divorce had turned into a nightmare. I'd heard the stories, of course. Every local around Millinocket knew about the supposed beasts that roamed these parts, but I had dismissed them as campfire tales meant to frighten tourists. A branch snapped somewhere to my left. I pivoted, my flashlight beam slicing through the darkness, illuminating nothing but ancient tree trunks and shadows. The moon hung full and bloated above the canopy, casting an eerie silver glow through gaps in the leaves. I tried to control my breathing, to listen past the thundering of blood in my ears. Something was circling me. "Hello?" I called out, immediately regretting the decision as my voice echoed through the trees. "Is someone there?" Only the wind answered, rustling the pines. I backed up slowly, trying to retrace my steps when my heel caught on a root. I went down hard, the flashlight flying from my grip. It hit a rock and went dark, plunging me into near-total darkness. Cursing, I scrambled on hands and knees, fingers desperately searching the ground for the light. Instead, they touched something warm and wet. Blood, fresh and slick between my fingers. I recoiled, wiping my hand frantically against the leaves. My eyes had begun to adjust to the moonlight, and that's when I saw it. A trail of dark liquid leading deeper into the forest. And beside it, huge paw prints, too large for any natural wolf, pressed into the soft earth. The logical explanation was a wounded deer, hunted by a large predator. But Maine didn't have predators this size, not anymore. I found my flashlight, smacking it against my palm until the beam flickered weakly back to life. Every instinct told me to run in the opposite direction of those tracks, but then I remembered. My car was parked at a trailhead north of here. At least I thought it was north. Without the trail, without my compass, which lay forgotten on the dashboard of my Subaru, I was lost. Following the blood might lead me to a road, or at least to somewhere I could orient myself. It was a decision I would live to regret. I moved quietly, following the crimson trail, my breath forming small clouds in the increasingly cold night air. The forest grew denser, the ancient pines closing in around me like silent sentinels. The blood trail led to a small clearing, and what I saw there caused my heart to stutter. It wasn't a deer. The remains of what had once been a man lay scattered across the forest floor. His camping gear was strewn about, the tent shredded as though by massive claws. The victim's chest had been torn open, ribs protruding like broken fingers, reaching for the night sky. His face was frozen in a mask of pure terror, eyes wide and glassy, reflecting the moonlight. I stumbled backward, bile rising in my throat. As I doubled over, retching into the underbrush, I heard it, a low rumbling growl that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Slowly I straightened, turning in a complete circle, the feeble beam of my flashlight probing the darkness between the trees. There was nothing visible, but the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. "Who's there?" I called again, my voice cracking. "This isn't funny." The growl came again, closer now, followed by the sound of heavy breathing, not human breathing. And then I saw them, eyes reflecting the beam of my flashlight, glowing an unnatural amber from the shadows. Not at ground level, where a wolf's eyes would be, but at the height of a tall man. They blinked once, slowly, deliberately. I ran, crashing through the underbrush, branches whipping at my face. I fled blindly into the night. Behind me, I heard movement, heavy footfalls, the snap of breaking branches, the sound of something large moving with terrible purpose. It wasn't running. It was pacing me, tracking me, playing with me. My lungs burned as I pushed myself harder, faster than I thought possible at 47 years old. The divorce, the alcohol, the sedentary lifestyle, none of it had prepared me for running for my life. But adrenaline is a powerful drug, and terror an even more potent one. I broke through a line of trees and found myself standing at the edge of a vast bog. The moonlight reflected off the dark water, creating an otherworldly landscape of silver and black. Dense fog hung just above the surface, weaving between the skeletal trees that rose from the murky depths. There was no way around. The bog stretched in both directions as far as I could see. The sounds of pursuit had stopped. I turned, scanning the tree line, my chest heaving as I struggled to catch my breath. Had I lost it? A howl rose from somewhere in the forest behind me, answered immediately by another from across the bog. My blood ran cold. There was more than one. With no other choice, I began picking my way along the bog's edge, searching for a way across or around. The ground was treacherous, sucking at my boots with each step. The fog curled around my legs like ghostly fingers, as if the bog itself was trying to claim me. That's when I saw the cabin, a dark silhouette against the night sky, perched on a small rise of land that jutted into the bog like a peninsula. A faint light flickered in one window. Safety, people, help. Hope surged through me as I changed direction, moving as quickly as I dared across the uneven ground toward the structure. As I drew closer, I could make out more details. It was old, the logs darkened with age, the roof sagging slightly in the middle. Not a vacation rental or a modern hunting cabin, but something that had stood in these woods for generations. I was 50 yards from the cabin when the growl came again, much closer. I whirled around, the flashlight beam landing directly on it. The creature stood on two legs at the edge of the forest, its massive form silhouetted against the trees. It was at least 7 feet tall, with a wolf's head atop a body that was a grotesque hybrid of man and beast. Powerful shoulders supported arms too long for a human, ending in hands that weren't quite paws, with elongated fingers tipped with curved claws. Coarse, dark fur covered its body, and those amber eyes burned with malevolent intelligence. For a moment that stretched into eternity, we stared at each other, man and monster, separated by 50 yards of bog and centuries of evolutionary divergence. My mind struggled to process what I was seeing, to reconcile it with what I knew to be possible. The werewolf, for what else could I call this abomination, threw back its head and loosed a howl that shook me to my core. It was answered by more howls from the forest and from across the bog. I didn't wait to see more. I ran for the cabin, no longer caring about the treacherous ground. I slipped once, plunging knee-deep into the frigid water of the bog, but terror drove me forward. Behind me, I heard the splash of pursuit, the creature moving with terrifying speed despite the difficult terrain. The cabin door was 10 yards away. 5. I could see it was weathered but solid, a brass knob gleaming dully in the moonlight. Something whistled through the air behind me. Pain exploded across my back as claws raked through my jacket and into flesh. I screamed, stumbling forward, momentum carrying me the last few feet to the cabin. My hand closed around the doorknob. Unlocked, thank God. And I threw myself inside, slamming the door behind me. The cabin shook as something massive collided with the door. I fumbled with the lock, an old-fashioned deadbolt, and slid it home just as another impact hit, hard enough to send a shower of dust from the ceiling. I backed away from the door, my flashlight beam dancing wildly around the cabin's interior. It was a single room with sparse furnishings, a small table with 2 chairs, a wood stove in one corner, a narrow bed against the far wall. The walls were lined with shelves holding preserves, tools, books. A hunting rifle hung on hooks above the small fireplace. The windows were small but numerous, each covered with what looked like iron bars on the outside. Why would someone barricade themselves in like this? Another slam against the door, harder this time. The wood creaked ominously, the hinges groaning with the strain. I moved to the fireplace, taking down the rifle with trembling hands. It was an old bolt-action Remington, the wood stock smooth from years of handling. I checked the chamber, loaded. 5 more rounds sat in a small box on the mantel. "Get away!" I shouted, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears. "I'm armed!" A low, rumbling sound came from outside. Not quite a growl, not quite a laugh. It was circling the cabin now. I could hear its heavy footfalls on the wooden porch that wrapped around the structure. It was testing the defenses, looking for a way in. Something scraped against one of the windows, claws on glass. I swung the rifle toward the sound, hands shaking so badly I doubted I could hit anything. The scratching continued, moving from window to window, testing, probing. Then silence fell, heavy and expectant. I held my breath, straining to hear over the pounding of my heart. Where had it gone? Was it waiting for me to lower my guard? Or had it given up, moving on to easier prey? A crash from above answered my question. The creature was on the roof. Dust and debris rained down as something heavy moved across the cedar shingles. The whole cabin seemed to groan under the weight. I aimed the rifle at the ceiling, tracking the sound as it moved overhead. A horrible realization dawned on me. There was a chimney, small but large enough for something to reach down or drop something in. I was backing toward the door, eyes fixed on the fireplace, when I noticed something I'd missed in my initial panic. A trap door in the floor, near the bed. A cellar, potentially a way out, or at least a better place to hide. The sounds on the roof had stopped. I held perfectly still, listening. Nothing. Had it given up? I doubted it. These creatures, if there were indeed multiple, had the patience of predators. They could wait. My back throbbed where the claws had torn through my jacket. I needed to assess the damage, to see how badly I was hurt. Keeping the rifle ready, I shrugged out of my torn coat, then carefully lifted my shirt. My fingers came away bloody, but the cuts didn't seem terribly deep. More like warning swipes than a serious attempt to disembowel me. A sound at the window made me whirl around. Amber eyes stared in at me, unblinking. The werewolf was standing on the porch, its massive form filling the small window frame. It wasn't trying to break in, just watching, studying me. I could see intelligence in those eyes. A calculating malevolence that was far more terrifying than mindless rage would have been. It raised one clawed hand and with deliberate slowness, drew a single talon down the glass, producing a sound that set my teeth on edge. A message. It could get in if it wanted to. So why wasn't it trying harder? I backed toward the trap door, keeping the rifle trained on the window. The creature's eyes followed me, its head tilting slightly in what seemed like curiosity. I reached down with one hand, feeling for the iron ring that would open the cellar door, unwilling to take my eyes off the monster at the window. My fingers closed around cold metal. I pulled, and the trapdoor lifted with a groan of ancient hinges. Stale air wafted up from the darkness below. I chanced a quick glance down. A ladder descended into blackness. When I looked back up, the window was empty. I hesitated. Going into a cellar meant cornering myself, but the cabin wouldn't hold forever, not against that creature's strength. And if there were more of them out there, a thunderous crash decided for me. The door bulged inward, wood splintering around the hinges. It would only take 1 or 2 more hits like that to break through. I swung my legs over the edge of the trapdoor and found the ladder with my feet. Descending as quickly as I dared, I pulled the door shut above me, just as another crash shook the cabin. I found myself in absolute darkness, the only sounds my own ragged breathing and the ongoing assault on the cabin above. I fumbled for my flashlight, still clutched in my left hand while my right held the rifle. The beam illuminated a small cellar with a dirt floor and stone walls. Shelves lined one wall, holding more preserved foods and supplies. The space was maybe 15 feet square, with no visible exit except the way I'd come in. I was trapped. Above me, the attack on the cabin door continued. Each impact sent dust filtering down from between the floorboards. It wouldn't be long before the creature broke through, and once inside, it would find the trapdoor easily enough. I swept the flashlight beam around the cellar again, more carefully this time, searching for any way out. There had to be something. People didn't build root cellars without ventilation or emergency exits, especially not in a cabin with barred windows and reinforced doors. Whoever had built this place had been preparing for something. They had been preparing for them. The beam caught something on the far wall, not a door but a narrow tunnel cut into the stone. It was small, maybe 3 feet in diameter, and appeared to have been chiseled by hand. It angled downward, disappearing into darkness. Above me, the cabin door finally gave way, with a sound of splintering wood and tearing metal. Heavy footfalls shook dust from the ceiling as the creature entered the cabin. I could hear it moving around, sniffing, searching. It wouldn't take long to find the trap door. I had no choice. I approached the tunnel, shining my light inside. It extended farther than my beam could reach, rough-hewn steps leading downward into the earth. I would have to crouch to enter, crawling at first before the ceiling height allowed me to stand. A scraping sound came from above, claws on wood, searching for the edge of the trapdoor. I'd run out of time. Taking a deep breath, I entered the tunnel, moving as quickly as the confined space would allow. The air was damp and heavy with the scent of earth and something else, a musty animal odor that made my nose wrinkle. The tunnel hadn't been used in some time, but it had been used. Behind me, I heard the trap door crash open. A howl of rage echoed through the cellar as the creature discovered I'd escaped its immediate grasp. I didn't look back, focusing instead on moving forward, deeper into the earth, away from the monster that had once been human. For that's what I believed I was facing. Humans transformed into beasts, whether by curse, disease, or something science couldn't yet explain. The intelligence in those eyes couldn't be denied. These weren't animals. They were something more or less than human. The tunnel continued downward for what felt like hundreds of feet, though it was probably less. My knees and back ached from the awkward hunch position. Just when I thought I couldn't bear it any longer, the tunnel opened into a larger chamber. My flashlight revealed a natural cave, expanded and reinforced by human hands. Wooden support beams held back the earth in places where the rock gave way to soil. The floor was surprisingly level, covered with packed dirt. Against one wall stood a wooden table with what looked like maps spread across its surface, held down by rocks at each corner. Nearby, a small cot with a thin mattress and wool blanket offered the promise of rest. But it was the other wall that drew my attention. Weapons hung from wooden pegs. Another rifle, similar to the one I carried, a shotgun, several large knives, and what appeared to be a medieval crossbow, complete with bolts tipped with silver. Below these, a workbench held tools, ammunition, and small bottles containing liquids I couldn't identify. This wasn't just a hideout. It was an arsenal, specifically designed for hunting werewolves. I moved to the table, directing my flashlight beam at the maps. They were hand-drawn charts of the surrounding forest, with notations in a cramped handwriting that was difficult to decipher. X marks dotted the landscape, with dates written beside them. Some went back decades. At certain points, circles had been drawn, with notes like den and avoid at full moon. Someone had been tracking these creatures for years. A low bookshelf near the cot held leather-bound journals. I took one at random, opening to a page in the middle. April 17th, 1978. Full moon. Tracked the Alpha to the old Simpson property. 2 others with him. They took Michael's livestock again, but this time they didn't stop there. Found what was left of Michael's himself in the barn. They're growing bolder. The silver buckshot worked on the smaller one, but the Alpha escaped. I counted 5 distinct howls tonight. The pack is growing. I flipped through more pages, reading entries that spanned decades. The writer documented sightings, encounters, and kills. They theorized about pack hierarchies, territories, and transformation triggers. Some entries contained detailed sketches of the creatures in various stages of transformation. The level of detail was both impressive and disturbing. The most recent entry was dated just 3 months ago, June 12th, 2023. They found my cabin. I returned from hunting to find claw marks on the door and windows. The bars held, but for how long? I've moved my most important supplies to the safe room. If you're reading this and I'm gone, take what you need. Silver hurts them. Fire kills them. Don't hesitate, or you'll join me in whatever hell awaits those who fail." The journal ended there. What had happened to its author? Had they abandoned the cabin, or had the werewolves finally broken through those defenses? I had little time to ponder these questions. From somewhere in the tunnel behind me came the sound of movement, claws scraping against stone, heavy breathing echoing in the confined space. The creature was following me. My flashlight beam darted around the chamber, seeking another exit. There had to be one. The journal writer would never create a dead-end sanctuary. My light caught a dark opening in the far wall, partially concealed behind the weapons rack. Another tunnel. I grabbed a second flashlight from the workbench, larger and heavier than my own, with a beam that cut through the darkness like a sword. I slung the shotgun that had been hanging on the wall over my shoulder, pocketed as many shells as I could, and moved toward the new tunnel. This one was larger than the first, allowing me to stand almost upright. It sloped gently upward for about 50 yards before opening into another cave. This one entirely natural. Water dripped from stalactites overhead, forming small pools on the uneven floor. The sound echoed in the cavernous space, masking any noise of pursuit. My new flashlight revealed multiple openings branching off from this central chamber, an underground maze. Without a map, I'd quickly become lost. But staying put wasn't an option, not with the creature on my trail. I chose a tunnel that seemed to angle upward, hoping it might lead to the surface. As I moved deeper into the cave system, the air grew cooler and damper. The sound of dripping water was constant now, and occasionally I heard the rustling of small creatures, bats or rats, disturbed by my passage. The tunnel twisted and turned, branching several times. I tried to maintain a sense of direction, always choosing the path that seemed to lead upward or northward, but it was easy to become disoriented underground. After what felt like hours of walking, I emerged into another large chamber. This one showed signs of human presence. Old mining equipment lay scattered about, rusted with age. Maine had a history of small-scale mining operations, particularly for feldspar and beryl. I must have stumbled into an abandoned mine that connected to the natural cave system. I paused to rest, sitting on an overturned bucket. My back throbbed where the creature's claws had raked me, and exhaustion pulled at my limbs. I checked my watch. Just past midnight. I'd been running for hours, yet the night was still young. The silence of the cave was broken by a distant howl, the sound distorted as it echoed through the tunnels. It was followed by another, closer this time. They were in the caves. I extinguished my flashlight, plunging myself into absolute darkness. Without sight, my other senses sharpened. I could hear water dripping, the soft scurry of small animals, and, more distantly, the sound of something large moving through the tunnels. The musty smell of the caves was overlaid with something else now. That same animal scent I'd detected earlier, growing stronger. They were hunting me by scent. In these enclosed spaces, with the air still and heavy, my trail would be easy to follow. I needed to mask my scent somehow. My mind raced through possibilities. Water might help. It could at least confuse the trail. I moved carefully in the darkness, hands outstretched, until I found one of the small pools formed by dripping water. I splashed some on my clothes and skin, but it wasn't enough. What else would mask human scent? Mud? I felt around the edges of the pool until I found where the water had mixed with the cave floor, creating a thick, clay-like substance. I scooped up handfuls, smearing it over my clothes and exposed skin, covering as much of myself as possible. The cool mud soothed my wounded back somewhat, though I knew the crude remedy wouldn't prevent infection. Somewhere in the darkness, a stone skittered across the cave floor. I froze, hardly daring to breathe. The sound hadn't been close, but in these caves, acoustics were deceptive. I strained my ears, trying to pinpoint the direction of any threat. Silence fell again, broken only by the endless dripping of water. I risked turning on my flashlight for just a moment, keeping the beam pointed at the ground and shielded with my hand to minimize the light. The momentary illumination revealed several tunnel openings leading from this chamber. I chose one that showed signs of human modification. Wooden support beams and a more even floor, suggesting it might lead to a former entrance. Moving as quietly as possible, I entered the tunnel. The mud-caked clothes made movement awkward, but if it helped hide my scent from the creatures, the discomfort was worth it. I advanced slowly, one hand on the wall to guide me, stopping frequently to listen. The tunnel gradually widened, the ceiling height increasing until I could stand fully upright. The air became less stagnant, suggesting an opening to the outside might be near. Hope flickered in my chest, quickly tempered by caution. If I could sense the changing air quality, so could the werewolves. A sound from behind brought me to a halt, the unmistakable click of claws on stone. I pressed myself against the wall, holding my breath. The creature was in the same tunnel, moving steadily in my direction. In the confined space, there was nowhere to hide. I unslung the shotgun from my shoulder, checking that it was loaded with trembling hands. The journal had mentioned silver buckshot. I had no way of knowing if these shells contained silver, but they were all I had. The footsteps grew closer, accompanied by that same heavy breathing I'd heard outside the cabin. I raised the shotgun, aiming down the dark tunnel toward the approaching sounds. A low growl echoed off the stone walls, a sound of frustration. Had my mud disguise confused its tracking? The footsteps stopped. I could sense it there in the darkness, no more than 30 feet away, sniffing the air, hunting. For a breathless eternity, neither of us moved. I stood frozen against the wall, shotgun raised, every muscle tense. The creature remained still, perhaps listening as intently as I was. Then a sound from another direction, a distant howl, echoing through the cave system. The creature in the tunnel with me responded immediately, its answering howl deafeningly loud in the enclosed space. They were communicating, coordinating their hunt. The footsteps resumed, but to my immense relief, they began to recede. The creature was moving away, perhaps responding to the call of a pack member who had found a more promising trail. I waited until I could no longer hear any sound before continuing down the tunnel. The brief reprieve had cost me time, but might have saved my life. I moved more quickly now, still cautious but driven by the growing sense that an exit was near. The tunnel began to slope upward more steeply. The walls and ceiling showed signs of deliberate excavation. This had definitely been part of a mining operation. Wooden support beams appeared at regular intervals, some sagging dangerously with age. After climbing for what felt like another hour, I saw it, a faint grayish light ahead. Not daylight, but moonlight filtering into the tunnel from above. An exit. I approached cautiously, aware that the werewolves might be waiting outside. The tunnel ended at the bottom of a vertical shaft, about 15 feet high. Metal rungs embedded in the rock wall formed a ladder to the surface. At the top, I could see stars and tree branches silhouetted against the night sky. I listened carefully before beginning the climb. The forest above seemed quiet. No howls, no sounds of movement. Still, I ascended slowly, pausing every few rungs to listen again. The mud had begun to dry on my clothes, cracking and flaking off with each movement. At the top of the shaft, I peered cautiously over the edge before pulling myself out. I emerged in a small clearing surrounded by dense forest. The moon hung lower in the sky now, its light filtering through the branches of ancient pines. According to my watch, it was nearly 3 a.m. I had no idea where I was. The mine entrance was well hidden, overgrown with vegetation and probably unknown to most locals. It could be miles from the cabin, from the trail, from my car. Turning slowly, I tried to get my bearings. The forest looked the same in every direction. Towering pines and spruce, dense underbrush, fallen logs covered in moss. But there, in the distance, I could just make out a rocky outcropping rising above the trees. If I could reach higher ground, I might be able to orient myself. I started walking, moving as quietly as the forest floor would allow. Every snap of a twig under my boots made me wince. I kept the shotgun ready, my eyes constantly scanning the shadows between the trees. The werewolves were still out there, still hunting. The journey to the outcropping took longer than I expected. The forest was dense, the terrain uneven. Several times I had to backtrack around impassable thickets or steep ravines. By the time I reached the base of the rocky hill, the eastern sky had begun to lighten almost imperceptibly. Dawn was still hours away, but the darkest part of the night had passed. The climb was challenging, especially in my exhausted state. The mud had dried completely now, making my clothes stiff and uncomfortable. My back throbbed where the creature's claws had left their mark, and every muscle ached from hours of running, crawling, and climbing. When I finally reached the summit, I was rewarded with a view that both encouraged and dismayed me. From this height, I could see for miles in every direction. The forest stretched endlessly, a dark sea of trees silvered by moonlight. But there to the southeast, I could make out the faint glow of artificial lights, a town, or perhaps just a roadside gas station. Either way, it represented civilization, safety, potential help. It also looked to be at least 10 miles away across difficult terrain. I was contemplating the best route when a howl shattered the night. Close, much too close. I dropped to my belly on the rock, making myself as small a target as possible. From this vantage point, I could see movement in the forest below. Not one, but 3 dark shapes, moving with terrible purpose through the trees toward the base of the outcropping. They had found me again. How? I'd been careful, masked my scent, taken a route they couldn't have anticipated. Unless they'd been following me all along, herding me like shepherds with a wayward lamb. The realization hit me like a physical blow. They were intelligent, coordinated. This wasn't a random hunt, it was a game. Their game with rules I didn't understand. The creatures converged at the base of the outcropping. Even from my elevated position, they looked massive. Easily 7 feet tall when standing on their hind legs, which they did now, sniffing the air, their amber eyes scanning the rocks above. One of them began to climb. These weren't natural wolves, unable to navigate vertical terrain. They had hands with opposable thumbs, the dexterity of humans combined with the strength and agility of apex predators. The rock face that had been challenging for me would be trivial for them. I had perhaps 2 minutes before the first one reached me. Frantically, I surveyed my position. The outcropping was roughly circular, with steep drops on all sides. There was no way down except the way I'd come up, a route now blocked by approaching werewolves. I was trapped with nowhere to run. The shotgun suddenly felt very inadequate against 3 of these monsters. I had no idea how many shells I'd grabbed in my haste. 6, maybe 8. Enough for 1 creature if I didn't miss, but not 3. The first werewolf was halfway up the rock face now, moving with unsettling speed. In the moonlight, I could see details I'd missed before. The way its fur grew in an almost human pattern, thicker on the head and chest, the 2 human eyes set in a bestial face, the wickedly curved claws that dug into the rock face as easily as if it were soft clay. I aimed the shotgun at the approaching monster, trying to steady my shaking hands. 1 shot before it cleared the edge. Make it count. I squeezed the trigger. The blast was deafening in the night air, the recoil nearly sending me stumbling backward. The creature howled in pain as the buckshot tore into its shoulder and face. It lost its grip, falling backward down the rock face, taking a second werewolf with it in its descent. But there had been 3. A snarl from behind made me whirl around. The third werewolf had circled, finding another way up that I hadn't seen. It crouched at the edge of the outcropping, amber eyes fixed on mine, lips drawn back from fangs that gleamed in the moonlight. I fired again, but in my panic, the shot went wide. The creature lunged forward with terrifying speed. I tried to chamber another round, but it was on me before I could fire again, knocking the shotgun from my hands with a swipe of its massive paw. I fell backward, scrambling away from the advancing monster. My hand closed around a fist-sized rock, and I hurled it with all my strength. It struck the werewolf in the chest, earning a grunt but not slowing its advance. My back hit the edge of the outcropping. There was nowhere left to retreat. The werewolf approached slowly now, almost leisurely, knowing its prey was cornered. It rose to its full height, at least 7 feet of muscle and fur and fang. In the moonlight, I could see its chest moving with deep, regular breaths. It wasn't even winded from the climb or the chase. It tilted its head, studying me with those eerily intelligent eyes. And then it did something that froze my blood. It smiled, lips pulling back from yellow fangs in a grotesque approximation of human expression. "Please," I heard myself say, the word emerging unbidden. "Please don't." The werewolf's smile widened. It understood me. From below came howls and snarls, the other two creatures recovering from their fall, preparing to join their packmate. I had seconds at most. The werewolf before me dropped to all fours, muscles tensing for the final pounce. I closed my eyes, not wanting my last sight to be those terrible fangs closing on my throat. The blast caught me by surprise. Not the boom of the shotgun, but a sharper crack. The werewolf howled in pain. My eyes flew open to see it clutching at its chest, where dark blood matted the fur. Another crack split the night, and the creature staggered backward, howling again. A voice called from the darkness to my left. "Get down!" I dropped flat to the rock surface as a third shot rang out. This one caught the werewolf in the head, sending it reeling backward over the edge of the outcropping. Its howl of rage turned to a yelp of surprise, then silence as it fell. I lay trembling on the rock, unable to process what had just happened. Footsteps approached, human footsteps. A beam of light swept over me. "On your feet," said a gruff voice. "They'll be back." I looked up to see a figure silhouetted against the night sky. Tall and lean, dressed in what looked like hunting gear, a rifle cradled in experienced hands. The face beneath the brimmed hat was weathered, with a gray beard and eyes that had seen too much. "Who?" I began. "Later," he cut me off. "Right now we move. Can you walk?" I nodded, struggling to my feet. My entire body screamed in protest, but adrenaline was a powerful anesthetic. "Name's Harlan," the man said, already moving toward a narrow path on the far side of the outcropping I hadn't noticed before. "Follow me, stay close, and for God's sake, keep quiet." I retrieved the shotgun and followed, my mind reeling. Harlan moved with surprising agility for a man who appeared to be in his 60s, navigating the treacherous descent with practiced ease. At the bottom he paused, head tilted as he listened to the forest. Distant howls echoed through the trees, farther away now but filled with rage. "I hit the alpha," Harlan muttered, almost to himself. "They're pissed." "The alpha?" I whispered. "The big one. Pack leader." He glanced at me, eyes narrowing. "You've survived longer than most. First time in these woods?" I nodded. "And yet they didn't kill you right away. Interesting." He checked his rifle, a bolt action similar to the one I'd found in the cabin. "They were playing with you." "Playing? Like a cat with a mouse." Harlan started walking again, setting a brisk pace through the forest. "They could have taken you anytime they wanted." The thought sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with the cool night air. Why didn't they? "That's what I'd like to know," Harlan said over his shoulder. "The journals? Did you find them?" I stumbled, nearly falling over a root. "How did you—" "The cabin. My cabin. You found it? Found the cellar? Found my research?" It wasn't a question. "You're the one who wrote those journals?" I hurried to catch up with him. "I thought you were dead." A humorless smile creased his leathery face. "Not yet, though not for lack of trying on their part." He stopped suddenly, head cocked to one side. "Down." We both dropped to the forest floor as something large moved through the trees to our right, not running, but walking deliberately, sniffing the air. Through the underbrush, I caught glimpses of fur and the occasional flash of amber eyes reflecting moonlight. "Don't move," Harlan breathed into my ear. "Wind's in our favor. If we stay still, it might pass." I held my breath, willing my hammering heart to quiet. The creature continued its patrol, moving parallel to our position for 100 yards before melting back into the deeper forest. Only when the sound of its passage had faded completely did Harlan signal it was safe to move. We rose slowly and he led us in a different direction than we'd been traveling, away from where the werewolf had gone. "Your cabin," I whispered as we walked. "The bars on the windows, the reinforced door. You were preparing for them." "Been hunting them for 30 years, Harlan replied, voice low. "Though lately it feels more like they're hunting me." "What are they?" The question that had been burning in my mind since I first saw those amber eyes in the forest. Harlan was silent for several long moments. When he spoke, his voice had a weariness that spoke of decades of lonely vigilance. I asked the same question when I first came to these woods. I was a biologist, University of Maine, heard rumors of unusually large wolves, came to study them. He shook his head. What I found, science doesn't have a name for it. Lycanthropy is just a word from old stories. This is something else, something older. But they're, what? People who transform? Actual werewolves from horror movies? Some were human once, Harlan said. Others were born that way. They're a species, Theodore. A predator species that's inhabited these forests since before Europeans arrived. The Penobscot and Abenaki peoples knew about them, had rituals to keep them at bay. The early settlers learned the hard way to avoid these woods during the full moon. A branch snapped somewhere behind us. We both froze, listening. "The mine," I said when the forest had quieted again. "I found my way out through some old mine tunnels." "Do they connect to your cabin?" Harlan nodded. "The whole area is honeycombed with them. The werewolves use them too. Their dens are deep underground in the natural cave systems. That's why no one's ever found them. That's how they've remained hidden for centuries." We continued through the forest, Harlan setting a pace that was challenging but sustainable. As we walked, he explained more about the creatures that had nearly killed me, how they lived in packs with complex social hierarchies, how they communicated with a combination of wolf-like howls and more subtle signals, how they marked and defended their territory against human encroachment. "The transformation is tied to the lunar cycle," he said. "Full moon, they change completely. Can't help it. But the older ones, the alphas, they can partially shift anytime they want. The one that attacked you at the cabin was one of the oldest. Been tracking him for years." "How many are there?" I asked, dreading the answer. "In this territory, 20, maybe 30, but they're spread throughout the North Woods. Hundreds, all told." The number staggered me. How could so many predators remain hidden in a state as well explored as Maine? "People go missing in these woods all the time," Harlan said, as if reading my thoughts. "Hikers, hunters, campers. Everyone assumes they got lost, died of exposure. The lucky ones did." We walked in silence for a time, each lost in our own thoughts. The terrain had changed. We were moving downhill now, following what appeared to be a game trail. The trees thinned slightly, allowing more moonlight to penetrate the canopy. "Where are we going?" I finally asked. "I have a secondary hideout. Supplies, weapons, first aid for your back." Harlan glanced at me. "We'll rest there until dawn. They're strongest at night, especially under the full moon. Daylight doesn't hurt them, but they prefer to hunt in darkness." "And then what?" Harlan's weathered face hardened. "Then we kill the alpha?" I stumbled to a halt. "What? Just the two of us? You just said there were dozens of them." "Kill the alpha and the pack scatters," Harlan said, continuing forward, forcing me to hurry after him. "They'll fight among themselves for dominance. Give us time to get out of their territory." "Or we could just leave now," I suggested. "Get to a road, find a car, drive far away from here." Harlan stopped, turning to face me fully for the first time. In the moonlight, his eyes held a fierceness that reminded me uncomfortably of the werewolves. "I've been hunting that alpha for 15 years, he said quietly. "He's killed dozens of people, turned others. If I don't end him now, he'll only get stronger, and he'll come for both of us." "Why me? I'm just a tourist who wandered into the wrong woods." "Are you?" Harlan studied me with narrowed eyes. "They had you cornered multiple times, yet here you are, alive. They were testing you, Theodore. The alpha was curious about you." A cold feeling settled in my stomach. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying they don't let just anyone find my cabin, find my research. I'm saying the alpha might have been watching you for longer than you realize." Before I could process this disturbing implication, a howl rose from somewhere in the forest behind us, followed immediately by another and another. Unlike the earlier howls, these had a different quality, more urgent, almost excited. "They've found our trail," Harlan said, his voice tight. "Run!" We took off through the forest, abandoning stealth for speed. Harlan led the way, weaving between trees with a grace that belied his age. I followed as best I could, my exhausted muscles protesting with every stride. The howls grew closer, coming from multiple directions now. They were coordinating again, trying to cut us off. "There!" Harlan pointed ahead where a small structure was just visible through the trees. a hunting blind built high in the branches of a massive oak. "Climb!" We reached the tree moments before the first werewolf burst from the underbrush. Harlan pushed me toward the crude ladder nailed to the trunk. "Go! I'll hold them off!" I scrambled up the ladder as Harlan turned to face the oncoming threat. The crack of his rifle split the night, followed by a howl of pain. I reached the platform of the hunting blind and turned to see Harlan backing toward the tree, firing methodically as more shapes emerged from the darkness. "Harlan!" I called down. "Come on!" He fired one more shot, then slung his rifle and began to climb. A werewolf lunged from the shadows, claws raking at his legs. Harlan kicked out, catching the creature in the face with his boot, buying just enough time to climb out of reach. By the time he joined me on the platform, we were surrounded. 7 werewolves circled the base of the tree, pacing with predatory patience. Among them was the massive alpha, its chest and head matted with dried blood where Harlan's bullets had struck. Despite its injuries, it moved with fluid grace, amber eyes fixed on us with unsettling intelligence. "That blind won't hold both of us for long," Harlan muttered, checking his ammunition. "3 rounds left. Make yours count." He nodded toward the shotgun I still carried. I checked the weapon. 4 shells remaining. 7 werewolves. Not good odds. "What are they waiting for?" I whispered. The creatures continued to circle but made no attempt to climb the tree. "Him," Harlan nodded toward the alpha. "He's deciding." As if on cue, the alpha stopped pacing. It rose to its hind legs, standing nearly 8 feet tall. In the moonlight, its features were clearer than I'd seen before. The elongated snout, the heavy brow, the wickedly curved claws. But it was the eyes that held me transfixed. Yellow-amber, intelligent, calculating. It raised its muzzle and loosed a howl unlike any I'd heard before. Not a hunting call, but something more complex, with variations in pitch and rhythm that almost resembled speech. The effect on the other werewolves was immediate. They backed away from the tree, disappearing into the shadows of the forest until only the alpha remained. "What just happened?" I asked, barely daring to breathe. "He sent them away," Harlan said, his voice tight with tension. "He wants to handle us himself." The alpha dropped back to all fours and began to circle the tree again, movements deliberate, predatory. Then to my horror, it began to climb. The massive claws dug easily into the bark as it ascended with terrible purpose. Harlan raised his rifle, aiming carefully. "Wait," he said, holding his fire as the creature climbed higher. "Let it get closer. Can't waste the shot." The alpha was halfway up the tree now, its movements unhurried, confident. I raised the shotgun, but Harlan placed a restraining hand on my arm. "Not yet. Follow my lead." The werewolf continued to climb, 20 feet below us, 15, 10. "Now!" Harlan shouted, firing at the same moment. The bullet struck the alpha in the shoulder, causing it to roar in pain and anger. I fired the shotgun, the blast catching it in the chest. The creature's grip faltered, but it didn't fall. Instead, it lunged upward with shocking speed, clearing the remaining distance in a single bound. Its massive form crashed onto the platform of the hunting blind, wood splintering under the sudden weight. Harlan was thrown backward, his rifle falling from his grasp and disappearing into the darkness below. I fired the shotgun again, but in the chaos, the shot went wide. The alpha seized Harlan by the throat, lifting him as if he weighed nothing. I chambered another round, but before I could fire, the creature hurled Harlan from the platform. His scream was cut short by the sickening thud of impact far below. I was alone with the monster. The alpha turned to face me, its muzzle drawn back in what could only be described as a smile. It was enjoying this. The fear, the hunt, the kill. I fired the shotgun point blank into its chest. The beast staggered backward, crashing against the railing of the platform. Wood splintered, and for a moment I thought it would fall, but it recovered with impossible speed, lunging toward me as I frantically tried to chamber my last shell. Claws raked across my chest, shredding my jacket and the skin beneath. The pain was blinding, white-hot agony that sent me reeling backward. The shotgun was torn from my grasp, disappearing over the edge of the platform. I collapsed, my back against the trunk of the tree, blood soaking through my tattered clothes. The alpha loomed over me, savoring the moment. It could have ended me instantly. Instead, it sank to all fours, bringing its face level with mine. Those amber eyes studied me with unsettling intelligence. And then it spoke. The sound was guttural, distorted by vocal cords not designed for human speech, but unmistakable. The old man thought you special. I stared in mute shock. It was speaking English. Not special, it continued, the words slurred but comprehensible. Just meat. It raised a clawed hand, preparing for the killing blow. In that moment of pure terror, my hand closed around something hard and cold. Harlan's hunting knife, fallen from his belt during the struggle, now lying on the platform beside me. As the werewolf's claws descended, I drove the blade upward with every ounce of strength I possessed. The steel sank beneath the creature's jaw, up into the brain. The alpha's roar of rage turned to a gurgle. Its massive body convulsed, claws raking the air inches from my face. I twisted the knife, pushing deeper, refusing to let go even as the creature thrashed in its death throes. Hot blood poured over my hands, my arms, my chest. The werewolf's eyes, those terrible, intelligent eyes, fixed on mine as the light within them dimmed. It collapsed forward, its massive weight pinning me against the tree trunk. For a moment, I thought I would suffocate beneath it, a fitting end to this nightmare. But with a final effort, I managed to push the body aside. It rolled to the edge of the platform and then over, falling to the forest floor below with a heavy thud. Silence fell, broken only by my ragged breathing and the distant calls of normal, nocturnal wildlife. I lay there for what felt like hours, too weak from blood loss and exhaustion to move. The eastern sky had begun to lighten when I finally found the strength to check my wounds. The gashes across my chest were deep, but had mostly stopped bleeding. If infection didn't set in, I might survive. With agonizing slowness, I made my way down the ladder. My body screamed in protest with every movement, but the alternative, remaining in the hunting blind until someone happened to find me, wasn't viable. At the base of the tree lay the bodies, Harlan's broken form, and several yards away, the massive corpse of the alpha werewolf. In death, it appeared even larger than in life, a mountain of muscle and fur. The knife still protruded from beneath its jaw, the handle slick with blood. I approached Harlan first, kneeling beside him. There was no pulse, no breath. His neck had broken in the fall. His eyes stared sightlessly at the lightening sky. I closed them gently, murmuring a wordless prayer for the man who had saved my life, who had dedicated decades to hunting these creatures. From his pocket, I took a small, leather-bound notebook, the most recent of his journals, based on the dates inside. The world should know what he had discovered, what he had fought against. I owed him that much. As the first rays of dawn filtered through the trees, I heard them, howls in the distance, but different from before. These were mournful, confused, almost questioning. The pack had sensed the death of their alpha. Harlan had been right. Kill the alpha, and the pack would scatter, at least temporarily. But they would regroup eventually, under a new leader. The threat would remain. For now, though, I had a chance to escape. Using Harlan's compass, I oriented myself toward the southeast, where I had seen lights from the outcropping. The journey was agonizing, every step sending fresh waves of pain through my wounded body. But the knowledge that the pack was temporarily disorganized gave me the strength to continue. By mid-morning, I reached a paved road. An hour later, a logging truck stopped for the bloody, mud-covered stranger stumbling along the shoulder. The driver, a grizzled man named Mike, asked few questions beyond whether I needed a hospital. Bear attack, I told him, the lie coming easily. Who would believe the truth? At the small regional hospital in Millinocket, I gave the same story to the doctors who treated my wounds. They exchanged skeptical glances. The parallel gashes didn't match typical bear claw patterns, but in rural Maine, people learned not to pry too deeply into the mysteries of the North Woods. I spent 3 days recovering, using the time to read Harlan's final journal. The entries detailed his growing concern that the alpha was evolving, becoming more intelligent, more adaptable. The last page contained a crude map showing the location of several suspected dens, along with notes about pack movements and territories. On the 4th day, I checked myself out against medical advice. I had a rental car to retrieve and a long drive back to Boston ahead of me. But more importantly, I had decisions to make. I could walk away, return to my life, try to forget the horrors I'd witnessed, dismiss the experience as trauma-induced hallucination. Many would. Or I could take up Harlan's mantle. Someone needed to continue his work to protect the unsuspecting from the monsters that lurked in Maine's deep woods. As I drove south on I-95, putting miles between myself and the territory of the werewolves, I felt the weight of Harlan's journal in my jacket pocket. The knowledge it contained couldn't be unlearned. The responsibility it represented couldn't be abandoned. The full moon would come again next month. The pack would have a new alpha by then, and I would be ready.